a society think about nonprofits in a perverse and an unproductive way. My goal tonight is to help you to think about nonprofits in a different way, in the hope that many of you will consider working in the nonprofit sector in your careers, or someday start a nonprofit yourself. I've been puzzled over the years when I talk to students like yourself, when I talk to executives of corporations, where they say, well, nonprofits are the second best place to work. You go to a nonprofit if you can't get a job in a for-profit sector. You know, it's not the best and the brightest who go into nonprofits, it's the other people who go into nonprofits. This is so incorrect. And what are the reasons I hear? I hear the reasons, well, they're always asking for money. Obviously, they don't know how to live within our means. And that shows a complete lack of understanding in why we created the nonprofit sector in the first place. Or I'll hear, well, they're always lurching from crisis to crisis. You know, they're saying, I got to do this, I got to do that. Don't they know how to manage? Well, that shows a lack of understanding of the kind of constraints we're putting on this sector that would cause anyone to have to lurch from crisis to crisis. Or I go into their offices and they have old computers, they have software that's not up to date, their offices don't look very nice. If they're really such an excellent organization, why can't they do things well? Well, that reflects a lack of understanding of what we're imposing on what we require of nonprofits and how we starve them of capital. I came to the realization that what we really want from the nonprofits in our world is for them to be reliable providers of useful community needs, where a community need is something which the for-profit sector is not able to provide without losing money. And of course, the for-profit sector can't lose money. I came to this realization over the course of the last 25 years. In the 1980s, I worked in the budget offices in New York City, ultimately becoming a deputy budget director. In the early 1990s, I was the executive director of the Financial Control Board for New York State, which was the overseer for New York City, so I was involved in all of New York City budget decisions. And from 1987 to 1994, New York was in a constant position of fiscal stress. It started with the stock market crash in 1987, and just as the city was getting back on its feet, the U.S. went into a recession in 1991 and pulled New York City down with it. But what I saw was the citizens had a key idea of those services which they needed to be reliable. They had to know that they were there whenever the need arose. And that you could meet those priorities by deciding what to cut. That is the key mission. What they really needed was the thing that had to be reliable, that had to be the last thing you throw overboard in the sinking ship. But we impose on nonprofits ideas of across-the-board budget cuts, which has no sense of priorities. The second thing I saw was New York City is required under law to have a 3-year operating plan and a 10-year capital plan. That forces it to look at the future. And they use that to see what problems are ahead of them so that they can either avoid the problem or prepare themselves to deal with the problem. And that helped them very much to be reliable. I also saw the importance of reserves, something which New York was not allowed to have in those days. Reserves are something which give you flexibility, which allow you to anticipate problems. And you know what? It's something we take for granted in the for-profit world. We expect them to have high current ratios, strong balance sheets. We expect them to have good cash flow. But nonprofits, we often say, you can't have reserves, you have to put it into programs. So you can't have any extra cash. Then I was very fortunate to be able to become the chief financial officer of Harvard University. And I thought, isn't this sweet? The richest university in the United States. I'm never going to have to worry about budget issues. I'm going to be able, when anything we need to be done, there's going to be money to do it. You know what I did? Budget cuts. Because I realized that what makes for a successful nonprofit is more than just money. I also saw, and many of you in the university may take this for granted, but I saw that in a university you have some departments that are not able to raise money very easily. You have other departments where it's pretty easy to raise revenue. And what makes a university work is that the parts of the school that don't bring in money easily are just as central to the university. And what one does to make a university work is to try to take monies from those schools and departments, even if they don't want to give it away, to try to take it and use it to support those other departments. And that led me to my epiphany that what it takes for a nonprofit to be successful is completely different than what it takes for a for-profit to be successful. And the criteria we use to evaluate success in nonprofits needs to be different. But we are using criteria that are not appropriate for evaluating success. And we're imposing values and restrictions that are not mindful of what a successful nonprofit is supposed to be doing. Which takes me to the key idea I want to talk to you about today, is what does it take, what is the definition of a successful nonprofit? And let's start with the key mission. When we talk about nonprofits, we're really talking about 501c3 organizations, which is a section of the IRS code which exempts those organizations from paying taxes, and it allows people who give money to those nonprofits to be able to deduct it from their income taxes. And the reason they do that is because of the realization that there are some things which our society absolutely needs, which the market economy can't provide. If you're a student of economics, you've heard about externalities, external economies, and public goods, which is one set of these key mission activities of a nonprofit. On this graph here, the for-profit world rather, lives just in the horizontal dimension. If you're on the right-hand side, an activity is profitable, and if a line of business is on the left-hand side, it's unprofitable, and you drop it. But nonprofits have that second dimension, which is mission, high mission and low mission. High mission is something which is absolutely needed by our community, and this nonprofit provides it in a way that nobody else can, or in a quality that nobody else provides. And society says we have to have it. But it's something for which, if you do it well, you must lose money. Now, many people will say, well, that's why they do fundraising, right? Well, here's some facts I want you to be aware of. According to IRS data, over the last 25 years, there has never been a year in which contributions were more than 25% of nonprofit revenues. That means contributions will move that key mission only 1/4 of the way towards break even. Then you say, raise money, have endowments. Investment income has never exceeded 5% of nonprofit revenues. That means those two things together would only move you 1/3 of the way towards break even. So what would happen if that's the only thing you did? What would happen if all a hospital had was an emergency room and trauma center, where you have to be prepared for the worst possible accidents 24/7? But most of the time you just get some broken bones and some colds. But we want it to be there all the time, don't we? What happens in the nonprofit sector is they have to do other activities, because 70% of nonprofit revenues are no different from the for-profit sector. They do activities that basically charge and bring it in. What makes a nonprofit work is they have these other activities, which are the letters O on this graph. Now, there's some things that are not quite as central to mission, so they can tolerate only a small loss. But most of those activities are profitable. And by doing those activities, they can take the profits and use it to cover the losses of that key mission which we want and the for-profit sector cannot provide. But it's not enough just for those profitable activities to just pay for the key mission. The overall organization has to be profitable. Yes, nonprofits have to be profitable. The only difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is not whether you earn profits, but what you do with those profits. A nonprofit uses its profits to sustain the key mission. But we have to go back to reliability. On this graph, I want to kind of give you a sense of what does reliable mean. And it slopes up to the right to reflect inflation. But basically, if you're an economist, you'd say it's this constant real level of activity. This means we want to know that that emergency room is always going to be open. We want to know that if something, recession happens or there are bad financial circumstances, they're not going to close down that emergency room. But the reality is, business cycles. There has never been a decade in this century or the last that has not had at least one recession. What that means is, in the next 10 years, the odds are there's going to be another recession, no matter how much we're worrying about our economy today. Now, if we want stable services, you'll see that in a recession, revenues fall below that reliable level of services, where you see D's on that graph. Well, the only way you can support that reliable level of services is in the recovery, where you see surpluses are, where revenues are above expenses, you see an S for surplus. Nonprofits need to have surpluses set aside in reserves so they can sustain that key mission. And that leads to two important lessons. One, a nonprofit, a successful nonprofit, needs to be running a surplus in good economy. Yet oftentimes we look at a nonprofit and say, well, this one has a surplus, that one's just break even, we won't give to the one with a surplus. They don't need the money. But they're the successful one that are trying to be reliable for us, and that's what we want. And the second lesson is, a successful, well-run nonprofit must run a deficit in a recession. But you know, it doesn't bother us in the for-profit sector. Most corporations lost money in 2008 and 2009, and we just said, well, it was a bad quarter. But somehow we often tell our nonprofits they have to balance their budgets, which means they have to cut out our reliable services so they can bring it down to their revenue levels if they didn't set aside enough surpluses. So a nonprofit really has to live with two personalities. It has to be an excellent provider of a key mission activity that must be losing money if it does it well. Because if it tries to break even, it won't be providing us what we need in our society, or it will be not serving some of our citizens that we want them to serve. And it has to be an innovative creator of for-profit businesses in order to create the profitable activities that make it successful. And I want to let you know that you are most likely to find these successful nonprofits in your local communities, not at the national level. And let me give you some examples in my local community, which is Columbus, Ohio. We have the Columbus Zoo. The Columbus Zoo has now been rated the #1 zoo in the United States. You may love San Diego, but you're now #2. The Columbus Zoo would say that its key mission is conservation of endangered species. No one pays for that. You lose money. But they say that's what they need to do. Now, they also let us come see the animals. That's kind of important, not so key in their mission, but they still lose some money on it. But you know what? They own a golf course. Low mission, profitable. They own a water park. Low mission, profitable. They're building a hotel. Profitable, not related to mission. And they use that to support conservation of species. We have a botanic garden. They would say their key mission is supporting community gardening and helping to educate people on community gardening and botany. They just spent millions of dollars to build a super wedding facility because people will pay a lot of money to have weddings around beautiful plants. Not mission related. They did it to earn the profit to support their key mission, which nobody will pay for. We have a YMCA. They would say their key mission is to help indigent adult males with housing and job training. No one helps adults anymore. They only help kids. You can't get money to pay for it. It's a money loser. So you know what they did? They built gyms in the well-to-do suburbs all around the city to compete with the for-profit gyms so they could make profits to support their downtown men's shelter. I could go on. We talk about Goodwill. We could talk about Meals on Wheels. All of these are successful nonprofits that follow this kind of business model. Now, I really admire TED's focus on nonprofits and focus on global issues. But you need to be informed about what a successful nonprofit looks like and what it needs to do. Without that, people are going to have misimpressions of what constitutes success in the nonprofit sector. They're going to impose these biases and restrictions that compromise what they do. We also have to have nonprofit managers understand what they need to do to be successful. They need to focus on their high mission, but they also need to have profitable activities. And I've never run into a nonprofit that didn't do at least 3 or 5 activities. Even in the social sector, we've identified how to do profitable activities with the skill base that they already have. I hope in the time I've had today, I've given you an idea that the nonprofit sector has challenges that require some of the most skilled people around. And I spend much of my time now talking about when nonprofits link mission to money. The mission is so appealing, the challenge is so great, and the excellence so widespread that we all should aspire to a career in the nonprofit sector. Thank you very much.